in any.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're back in session. And the next item on our agenda is a conversation about key performance measures. And before I turn it over, just want to say and to have a short opportunity for board member comments. I believe that the key performance measures are for the legislature. I believe they're owned by the agency, the department. I just want everybody, what's our role? Can we just kind of go around and I'd love to hear how everybody sees our role, since they're neither for us or owned by us, but clearly we have a role. Anybody want to?
I'll start.
Okay, Ben.
Thanks for asking that. And my answers might change after this presentation. I'm eager to hear this. I see, especially in light of the change in an authority around the state forester now lying with the governor's office, I see this as an important tool, a set of important measures to sort of assess the performance of the agency. And something that the board, while the board doesn't directly own this, it seems like, something that the board should really be paying attention to. And it's a way for us to highlight where the agency is doing well and where the agency could use some help. So I see it as a very important tool, and more important as time goes on. Leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Brenda.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And I agree with Ben, but I think also not only does the board pay attention to the KPMs, but the general public does as well. And that comes up quite often in testimony, both written and verbal. And I think it's our duty to pay attention to what those constituents have to say. So we have to take it into consideration.
Anyone else? Heath?
I guess what I would, and this will probably come up in the presentation, I'd just be interested to know, like, understand that these KPMs are out there, but to the veterans on this board, can you ever recall a time where this board held the staff accountable to those KPMs?
We tried.
In which respect?
No response.
I think that proves they're the legislature's KPMs, but you know, nevertheless, they're a political tool. I appreciate that.
Well, I think, I mean, I'm not going to argue with that. It is very political. But I think the fact that those targets, thresholds are set, and a report is issued every year. Not only is it important whether or not that target is being met, but is there progress being made? And one of the KPMs is the amount of layered forest and state forest lands, help me out, Mike. And it was set at a certain level. And for several years, board members would say, how much progress are you making on this? And the answer was either none or little, or, well, we've changed the way we measured it, and so it's hard to say now. So we pay attention to it. We try to hold the agency accountable to what they said they're going to do. But so far, it's not been very effective, and I think that has to change.
My question, we'll get into the substance of some of this in a bit, but mine's a little more mechanical, I guess. Imagine the board said, hey, we want a KPM that requires the agency to do the same work with half the total staff. So just an arbitrary thing. Like, what would the legislature do with that? Like, we would recommend that. That wouldn't automatically become a KPM, right? It would just be a thing we said recommend? Is this a recommendation? Are we making a recommendation to the legislature? What, like, what's happening here? And maybe staff can answer that question. I mean, like, how were these developed? Like, did the board write them and then the legislature just rubber stamped them? Or do these come from, you know, legislative revenue? Do they, you know, we can get to that, I suppose, but it's kind of unclear to me, you know, Ben, some of your positioning on this, I think has been premised on the idea that these are kind of our KPMs and that, you know, we're crafting these, and that may be true. I just kind of have a factual question about, like, what even is this? What are we even doing here? Or is this just kind of like, hey guys, here's some opinions we have, and they'll take them or leave them?
Yeah, I mean, I see our role, I mean, talking about politics, I mean, ends up being a dirty word sometimes, but, you know, we are a political board. We are, we are all appointed by the governor and then confirmed by the legislature. And we're here, you know, politics is all about representing the people of Oregon. We are here as representatives of the people of Oregon, not of the agency. It doesn't mean it has to be, you know, in any way mean that we don't have to work carefully together. But I think our role really is one of trying to make sure that these key performance measures are meaningful and for the people of Oregon. That's pretty much the way I think it should be.
Heath, I appreciate your question, and I think in the past, in the almost 5 years I've been on the board, whenever these conversations have come up, usually they're couched in, oh, well, that question is old, we need to update it. It's not meaningful anymore. So they have lost their relevance in many ways, which is why I'm very happy that we're here having this conversation. I don't see the legislature ever coming back to anybody saying, hey, change something. Like, I don't know that there's ever been any meeting. It's reported every year, but I don't know that there's ever been any feedback, not to my knowledge. But like Jim said, this is available to the public. This is a way to sort of assess the effectiveness of this agency. And I would hope that if we get the questions right, they're doing a good job of assessing the current work of this agency. They can then be used to do exactly that. And I think the board has a role in highlighting that, because the legislature doesn't seem to be interested in that, but I am.
Go ahead, Liz.
I don't know if I have anything very specific or mechanical to say about this, but I've just been thinking of the types of power and just leaving our lunch and before lunch about our role and how we can be more effective. And I think just the world, we've seen a lot of wielding of hard power around the world. And then there's this other piece that can be just effective, soft power, diplomacy, relationships, whatever. So I'm kind of thinking that as our evolving role on the board, you know, evolves here, this is an opportunity for soft power, you know, to have our say and to say clearly and eloquently as much as we can and specifically. So that I just say that I don't have anything specific, but that's the kind of the world that I'm thinking about, is how do we shine the light on soft power now, if that's where we are.
Well, good point, Liz. We've never had less hard power than we do now. So if we don't use our soft power, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. Okay. I think we'll turn it over to you, Tim.
Thanks. And looking forward to this conversation, and I'm glad I'm not the only person on the agenda that's going to help carry it. So I have a whole team of folks who are going to walk through their respective KPM suggestions. So the way this section's kind of framed up is to initiate a conversation on this subject that's been of interest for the board and others for a while, and for the department. So our key performance measures, they're part of our budgeting process. They're kind of the metric for the effectiveness of the money that we're entrusted with and the programs and the mission we're to deliver. And both the Board of Forestry and the Legislative Fiscal Office have had interest in this as well. So that was a statement in one of our committee hearings this last session, was some direction of coming back with some recommendations to LFO for this process. So glad to have some time to kick off that discussion on some concepts and constructs to dialogue over the next couple months. Generally, this usually would lock into the board's normal retreat process. So moving forward, it could be something the board can consider at future retreats as well to keep up with. And also there's Executive Order 2526 also had a connection with the analysis of an agency's KPMs, and the department is part of that as well. So what the proposal you see in front of you is, staff analyzing what we currently have, what we currently do, and what's currently in our mission and what has changed. Many of these KPMs have been in place for a decade or more. I believe the KPM process started in the mid 2000s, was where it first came into play with state government. Since then, we've had Senate Bill 762. State Forest has pursued an habitat conservation plan. The PFA has went into place, and the statewide HCP as well. So a lot of items that are in either new or that are in the process of modernizing some of these processes. So we looked at it through the lens of the 27-29 box. What could we look at for the few pieces, as Kate mentioned earlier today, what could be through this round? What is something that we want to analyze a little further, but we don't have the next thing in place, like the HCP and the incidental take permits, where a 2931 option could be presented. What the department influences, or versus, what can we actually, where do we control our measure of success? And also making sure they're meaningful. So kind of those were the options that we were looking through as we walked through the analysis of them, of these various things. So the goal is to walk through the document. I believe we have until 1:30, and then we're going to swap out topics for a little bit, and then we'll hop back in, but walking through the document and then walking through any questions with the board and getting feedback on some of the proposals and what the board would like for some next steps. That's kind of the goal. Perfect. With that, I'll turn it over to Justin. He's the first up with KPM 1.
Afternoon, everyone. For the record, my name is Justin Hallett. I'm the Agency Administration Division Chief over a multiple wide portfolio of programs here in administration. KPM 1, customer service to county governments and forest landowners, 5% of Oregon's forest counties and forest protective associations, rating that ODF programs collectively provide good or excellent customer service. Score in categories of overall timeliness, accuracy, helpfulness, and expertise, availability of information. And this isn't in your packets, but I also wanted to offer that in May of last year, we put forth a new customer service policy that will also further complement this, and we plan to survey against that policy. Tim, did you want me to defer KPM 2 back to you? Do you want me to cover that?
Sure. So KPM 2, we had discussion at the board governance subcommittee on this one in particular, where KPM 2 has very specific criteria, and it's how the board measures or the surveys that the board takes to fit into those boxes. The board or commission has to have an independent state budget, or the board or commission hires the agency director. So with the change of Senate Bill 1051 from this last summer, that KPM is actually proposed for deletion because it's not a requirement to have anymore. And the proposal is to allow the board more autonomy in identifying what its own metrics are for success and measuring its effectiveness. So that's the proposal for that one.
Go ahead.
I have a point of order question. It looks like you're sort of working your way through these. Are you hoping to keep discussion at the end, or do you want to have board discussion and input on each as we go along? How would that work best for you?
Maybe a quick summary through them at first, and then we can come back to them as the board wants to identify which ones they have the most interest in.
Okay. because I think I've probably got comments on most all of them, but
Yeah.
I want to make sure to put that in the right place.
Yeah. Does that work for the board?
I would tend to disagree.
Okay.
Sorry, I prefer that we'd be able to have immediate feedback on, as we go.
In situ works.
And I know we're gonna try to, I understand what the time implication is there, but, I see an agreement that makes a little bit more sense. So, with that, if you don't mind, we'll start commenting right away on number 2. Did anybody have any on number 1? Okay.
Brent, go.
Then
Go
let's
first.
go back to number 1 then, and I'll start you and then, Ben.
I just don't remember how these data are collected, what data, what tool is used to collect the data, what the percentages are that constitute good or excellent. Help me out here.
Thank you for the question, Brenda. Sabrina Perez, she reports out on this. She's the administrator of the survey. She has all those metrics. I can come back to you with all that information if you want, but I do not have that off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sorry about that. I think just come back to the entire board with that so that we have a better context for this one. Thank you.
I was gonna echo Brenda's comments. I had some questions about how it was measured, but we can save that for the next time. I have a thought on number 2, if that's okay,
Go ahead.
unless anyone else had number 1. I just want to echo what Tim said on number 2 in the Board Governance Committee meeting. The last meeting, we weren't quite prepared for this to be removed completely, but I think given that it can be removed, we're interested in making it our own. And I don't want to speak for Heath or Liz, but I think that was the general sentiment, that we would like to keep it as our own KPM separate from this larger project, but keep that.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, in terms of not continuing to do this survey, I would want to, put up 3 cheers. We've all, I think, I could speak for the board, hated that survey. And so much of it was too long, and so much of it just really didn't make much sense the way it was structured. That said, to not have any self-evaluation would be a mistake. I'm happy to help, but it does seem like it's in the your Ben's committee on the board policy manual. I would like to see something. If we're asking yes or no questions, let's just have yes or no answer. And if we're asking for more thoughtful kind of questions, that's great. I also think it would make sense for it to just be. I think it will be more valuable if it's shorter. We don't have to. But whatever, we can do something that we can own. But I think it's essential that we do have some yearly self-evaluation. Anybody else thoughts on 2? Okay.
All right. Good afternoon, Chair Kelly, Interim State Forester Skinner, and members of the board. KPM 3 is a Forest Resources Division KPM. That's the Forest Practices Act compliance. And currently that target's at 100%. I think over the history of reporting Forest Practices Act compliance, it started at a lower target, and LFO previously had continued to increase that up to 100%. And so it's listed as a change the target at the moment. And I was reviewing the text here right before, and it doesn't quite reflect what I think we're proposing here. It says, increased targets over time. So what our intent here would be to set a minimum base of like an 80% target, thinking of rule changes either now or in the future as we measure compliance through our compliance monitoring program. And then ideally, we would like to see that just be an increasing trend over time, right? So we just went through about 110 rule changes for the Forest Practices Act. So what we would like to see, given that we have a training program, et cetera, that the metric actually be an increasing or stable trend in compliance with the Forest Practices Act over time. The basis for thinking about it like that is if we're not able to achieve an increasing or stable trend over time, it also puts us in the place when we go down for our budget hearing to discuss what might be the issue there, right? Do we need more resources from the legislature? Do we have enough training staff? Maybe it identifies that we have an unclear rule language. Maybe we need some policy. Maybe we need some more training. So that's how we're thinking about KPM 3, where it's just been a static and it's a number and it's a target and it's absent time and change with rules. It may not be the best indicator just to have a hard target, but would rather convert that to like a trend-based metric, which As we move down this, we've had others that are trend-based that are proposed for other actions later, but we did have some that were like increasing and decreasing trends in like water quality previously. So having a trend-based metric has been a thing we've done before. So that's the nexus for KPM 3.
Josh, and I understand that seems reasonable and logical to me related to the PFA. What about other forest practices, like reforestation, things that aren't necessarily affected by the private forest accord? Are we changing that target too?
So the way the KPM process has worked is we have rotated through a set of board rules that we monitor, right? So at times it's been reforestation. Going forward, part of the focus will be on the PFA strategies, right? Like, are we doing the right stream buffers or the road stuff? So we'll be going through those different pieces over time and looking what those trends are looking like for compliance. So, right now the setup is I think we conduct a pilot and then we kind of do about a 5-year look at some of those things. So, there'll be phases over time that we're looking at different components of the forest practice.
Just curious, Josh, how you arrived at 80 and not 90 or 70, and for specific aspects of the Forest Practices Act, or for all? Seems like some might be pretty, well, as Joe just said, some might be pretty easy to achieve and others are going to be pretty difficult to achieve. So seems like there's some nuance here that could be teased out.
Yeah, and the 80% was just, a starting point, right? Like if anything went below that number, like based on our experience with Forest Practices Act compliance, I would think generally folks should exceed that compliance rate based on our experience. But also that would be a pretty significant indicator if at the starting point we were less than 80% on something, so.
So no data to drive that?
No.
Just basically a guess. Yeah, thanks.
If we look at history on this one, I mean, we're in a lot better position than we were a few years ago because we had this 100% target, and yet there was no, it was completely voluntary. And so to me that, it was just a ridiculous situation we were in. We're no longer in that. I don't really care that much about what percentage we set exactly. I like the idea of making sure because of the recent changes that our expectation is stepping up. But I don't know how others feel about that. Any other comment?
Well, I think you have data, monitoring data results already now, don't you, Josh? What's the current rate of adherence to the Forest Practices Act?
Yeah, so it's varied over time, right? When I look back at what we've reported, most scenarios would, from what I recall, most scenarios would exceed that 80%. Almost just about anything I can think of. When you start parsing it out, sometimes by landowner or other categories, you may find some that are in that smaller geographies that maybe aren't hitting right at 80%, right? Which for us would indicate some more focus in those particular areas or with those particular landowner groups or particular geographies. So.
And that was after the changes were made in the monitoring approach?
Yes. And so that includes, us working with a statistician and, the appropriate design here for.
So my own view would be start with where you are now and then look to improve rather than setting the bar low. So anyway, just use the data somehow.
Well, if I understood Josh correctly, I think that's his proposal. Are you wedded to the, I think I heard you say that the proposal is that you have a stable or increasing trend, not necessarily that we measure ourselves against an arbitrary 80%.
Yeah, correct. The thought is though that we may have to have a starting point somewhere for the very first reporting year, so we have some sense of where we think that's at, right? And so.
Fine. If in fact, though, you're going to set that number at approximately where we are, I don't know that we need to enunciate where we are here. Sure. That is to say, implicit directive.
Yeah. And I would agree, just something that we should have stable increasing trends. I mean, that seems very reasonable and should be happening. And to me, that's a more, like I think Jim said it, more informative to me as a board member is how are we educating landowners? How are we educating operators? That's going to be a more important piece of data.
Yeah, I like the trend, the increasing trend. I guess I have a couple thoughts. If we're going to call it stable or increasing trends, we're starting at 80%, that gives me pause because that says that if we stayed at 80%, that's okay. And I don't think that's okay.
Yeah.
I think we should be increasing. And I think we have some real challenges. I think it was OSWA, some small woodland folks put together a report recently that's compliance is actually scarily low for reforestation on small woodland acreages. And they put together a very good report that has a lot of meaningful ideas about why and how to address this. And so there's real work to do here, at least on reforestation, and I'm sure many other areas. But I would argue that we would set it wherever you want, where we are currently. We want to see an increasing trend, and that's going to take work, but we should really strive for that.
Anybody disagree with that?
I do. It can only be just analytically, not on the policy. I think what you want to avoid is a failing performance measure where people are otherwise doing a good job. So you can envision a circumstance where you're at 100%. And if your key performance measure is that it's increasing in trend, that may not be possible. And so I only mean to suggest that that the performance, and there are circumstances, there are practices under which we are at 100%. And so I think that it could be that you would say, and I'll leave it to the agency and they could grapple with this, but I think below a certain threshold, you may dictate an increasing trend.
Yeah. I just want to be clear, I'm all in favor of an increasing trend, but I just say start where we are now and not drop the bar lower. And Heath, if we get to 100% and we just simply can't increase it, I want that problem.
Yeah, but I think that like there are many circumstances in which 98, 99, and 100 are being attained, and I don't want to style people as having failed in those circumstances.
And that's kind of, right now it is at 100, right? So regardless of what we were reporting on in the past, right? Like I would expect riparian compliance to be pretty, high rating in the future, right? Because that's pretty standard and we have some solid descriptions now, but we still may not achieve 100%. It may look like we're not achieving our KPM if we were just to go with a solid target number.
Yeah, and we do the same thing with like fires and starts at, percentages at 10 acres. Obviously, the ideal is that 100% of them not, exceed 10 acres, but that's not an appropriate target. And we don't want to tell the agency they're failing if in fact they, are hitting an otherwise reasonable metric.
I guess I would think about it a little differently. And I think in my manufacturing and business background, we often set 100% targets knowing that they're impossible to reach. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't always be striving for them. And I think the reality is we might not ever get, with fire, we never get really past 97 or 98%. We can still strive for perfection. And I want to not lose sight of that. That to me, anything under 100%, while it might be the reality, means there's still work to do. Maybe less work the closer we get to that. And there's lots to celebrate, obviously. But if we're at 97%, that still means 3% of the acres out there are not meeting the rules. That's still a problem. Even it's a smaller problem than what is 80%, but we should reach.
Yeah.
I mean, I do, this is the issue. We'll run into this with the other performance measures as well. Like, again, for staff morale, for agency, judging themselves against metrics. I mean, we are also in manufacturing and we do not set perfection as our goal. And so I would say setting realistic and targets that, are ambitious but attainable is more meaningful to me. And so it seems like one way to do this would be, again, increasing trend is the objective, up to 90% compliance, and thereafter it's stable or increasing. But I just throw that out as an arbitrary measure.
I think we're getting into the world of wordsmithing, but I think there is something where we could say that, a minimum of 80% with an increasing trend and a target of 100%. Have we beaten this up enough? Okay, move on to the next one. Or is it 1:30 already?
Yep. I think we'll do a quick swap.
Yeah, we're going to do a quick swap and should not be more than a half hour. So we'll see you guys back at 2 at the latest. Sandra, welcome. You're up. You feel at home here, Sean.
I forget how to do the microphone. There we go. Chair Kelly, members of the board. For the record, my name is Chandra Ferrari, Governor's Office Natural Resources Policy Advisor. Very excited to be with you all today. I will apologize in advance. I think you probably already know this, but you just have me today. We are going to have another more deeper conversation with you all, I believe at your next meeting in March, to discuss the contents of the executive orders that I've listed here. And so you'll have our climate and energy advisor, as well as Jeff Huntington, our senior natural resource advisor, and our communications/natural resource advisor as well. So you'll have the whole team next time. We're hoping to have a lot more time and space with you then. But in this setting, hopefully in a slightly more informal way, I was hoping to kind of kick things off and maybe get you noodling on a few things that will help our conversation next month, if that sounds okay with you all. Okay, excellent. Well, I am going to be starting with Executive Order 2525 and Executive Order 2529 are related to renewable energies and will be discussed a little bit more in depth at the next meeting. So I'm going to actually be focusing mostly on Executive Order 2526, if that's all right with you all today. And I think it is actually the biggest connection point to the department and to the board's work.
Okay.
So we will do that. If you can please move to the next slide. Great. So Executive Order 2526 really is about taking urgent action to promote the resilience of our natural and working lands and waters and communities. This is recognizing that our natural and working lands and waters have immense value to Oregonians that we all know and recognize, and that's immense value in a number of different ways, whether it's economic, environmental, spiritual, cultural, all of those things. We also recognize that there are significant changes that we're experiencing. You guys are discussing this all the time, right? We're seeing changes to the severity and occurrence of our wildfire, something, of course, that you all are dealing with, changes to our precipitation, our snow accumulation, which we are, of course, seeing this year as well, and the effects that we see from those changes, which can be disease, we've seen those in our forests sometimes, drought, that kind of stuff. And given the immense importance of our natural working lands and waters, that it's really incumbent upon us to make sure that those areas are as resilient to those changes as possible so that our future generations can continue to benefit from them, right? The other thing that this executive order is trying to recognize is that, again, we cannot do the work alone. We can't do the work alone as siloed agencies. We can't do the work alone as an administration, that this really is the all hands on deck situation. And given the stress and importance of the work, that we can't afford to be misaligned. And so this is really an attempt to move our agencies forward together in a really coordinated and strategic way, and also in a way that we can build partnerships to scale our work as well. I think we say a lot that our, Jeff has a saying, I never get it quite right? But it's like we're 2% of the budget and 50% of the noise or something like that. But the point is that the natural resource portfolio is, we fund it at a very, very small rate in the state. And that doesn't look like it's necessarily going to change at any point in the near future, unfortunately. And we're also seeing federal changes that are affecting the amount of funding coming to some of these really important priorities. So with that in mind, it is even more important and more critical that we are leveraging and pooling what we have and that we're being really strategic in how we're advancing that work. And so, this is an attempt to get our 14 natural resource agencies and our 30+ boards and commissions all grounded around a common vision, because our work all does tie together, even if that isn't super intuitive to folks from, the outset, and even if not all of the work is super germane to everything that we have here. There are a lot of threads of connection, and we want to be able to identify those and really amplify those in a way that makes sense. So this is the governor's North Star, if you will, for her agencies, and hopefully conveys some broad-based direction that can, again, get us rowing in the same direction. So I'm happy to talk through, again, a broad scale about what's in the executive order. I have some of the next steps or things that we have in motion now, and then maybe some things for you all to think about in advance of our next conversation. Again, happy to have that conversation or start it today, but I think we'll also have a bigger team and a lot more, or hopefully a little bit more time at the next meeting. And you'll also have your state forester as well. Next slide, please. So keeping it very simple, these are the components of the executive order. I've been told, a lengthier executive order than folks are used to. And this is about as simple as I can probably make it, but I'll chat through the different components in a little bit more depth, and then we can talk about it. So our first order of business in thinking about the executive order is, what does it mean to have resilient lands and waters? And we need to be on the same page about that. So but we also don't have a lot of time. We don't want to be involved in another planning exercise or things that sit on a shelf. So we wanted to take a really quick effort to pull from existing information, existing approaches, to come to some common grounding around resilience attributes. What are the characteristics of resilient lands and waters that we're shooting for? Get some buy-in for that approach, and then get our agencies moving on work plans that are consistent with driving towards those attributes. So I'll talk a little bit more. This is one of our first things that we've been teeing up to make progress on, because it does drive a lot of the other actions in the executive order. So that's the first component. This work, by the way, is led by ODFW and Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board in coordination with an interagency team. The next section is about, well, I've kind of put the next two, in a sense, together, because it really is about driving actions that will protect and expand our high resiliency natural and working areas. And in the working lands front, we have, we are trying to recognize where the state has a connection in facilitating and fostering stewardship practices that promote resiliency. And so what this section requires is our agencies that have programs, funding, policies that can affect working lands and the practices that occur on those lands and waters, that we're taking a hard look at those to see what's working, what's not working, what should we be looking to scale, what's been an impediment to users using these tools. And the hope is that what we are doing is making our existing programs more functioning. We're highlighting and expanding opportunities for the ones that folks think are most attractive, and that we're also considering how we can expand our toolbox where needed. So this is just an assessment exercise by our agencies that they will also think about improvements too. We also have a very particular section in here that is thinking about our nearshore environment and building the resiliency there, recognizing that we have some really unique environments and values in those spaces, and also some unique economic drivers. And so there is a collaborative conversation that's spaced there to think about how, again, we build nearshore resiliency. So those are the components of that section. The 10 by 10 is really geared at protecting, again, our most high resiliency lands and waters, and identifying also where, with concerted action, we might build resiliency in areas. Like, what has the potential to be a high resiliency area? So what we're asking for is our agencies to think about how to protect, conserve, restore, or connect Oregon's lands and waters within additional 10% of lands and waters within 10 years. And this is intended to, again, allow us to focus our limited resources in the areas that make the most sense. Ideally, when we're approaching situations, any situation, we're able to understand the trade-offs, right? It doesn't mean that we're always leaning towards one thing or another thing, but we should understand what we're losing with any action that we take and what we're gaining with any action that we take. And so our hope is that we are really able to identify with each of our resilience attributes in particular, using those as our guide, where are our most special places that are going to be resilient to climate change? And the example that we use a lot is with our fish passage barriers. We've been funneling a lot of money to fish passage removal and helping our fish migrate to new habitat, and that's a really important action. In some cases, those fish might be migrating to an area that's going to get warmer with time and may not support them. And there may be other systems that are going to continue to have cold water spring inputs and be important refugia. And so if we have two actions to choose from, we should go with the one that's going to be more resilient, have more resilient habitat into the future. So those are the sorts of discussions and trade-offs that we would like to be able to identify. Another piece that's in that section is taking a hard look at mitigation solutions. What we have experienced, a lot of our agencies that deal in this space with mitigating impacts, is that folks who are looking for mitigation options are often in situations where they're not finding them, and they're frustrated about a lack of option, or believing that our existing programs are too burdensome. And then on the flip side, the folks that are trying to implement those mitigation programs are also frustrated because they're feeling like maybe they aren't adequately compensating for the benefits and values that are lost. And so we're kind of getting frustrated signals on all sides with a lot of our mitigation tools, and you're seeing a lot of approaches come through that are looking at new ways of thinking about it. And so we kind of wanted to be intentional and holistic and get ahead of the issue. Well, it's not getting ahead, but I guess it's getting caught up maybe with the issue of thinking about, are there different things we should be adding into our toolbox? And again, this connects to the prioritization, I think, conversation of, our mitigation tools in a space where we're really able to focus and compensate for the loss in those special areas or the most, high value areas, and what can we be thinking about other sorts of tools in maybe the lower priority areas. The next section, the lead by example section, is really about the state agencies walking the walk. So in the spaces, and this would apply, of course, to the department, where you manage or own lands or waters, that you are thinking about building climate resiliency strategies into your existing management plans. So you're still furthering your management objectives, but we are in fact setting the example for where you can do things in a way that also promote what I'd say are other benefits too. So that's the obligation for our agencies. And then the last bucket is a little bit more of a complicated bucket because it does connect into what I think are really significant and broader topics. But the first is around building community resiliency, and this attaches to an effort that's being led by our resilience officer in the governor's office to develop a plan for resilient Oregon. It's a bigger conversation around community resiliency, looking at safety and hazards and things like that, in addition to, of course, natural and working lands, which would be a piece of it. And it's a really ground-up led process where the communities are coming together in forums to identify tools and resources that they need to help their communities be resilient to climate change, and where the state supports are most useful. And then it's kind of building up into an overarching governing committee. And those committees are meeting right now. That effort is supported by some of our higher education institutions as well that have been kind of scanning broader resiliency strategies and pulling together recommendations and things like that. So those are open to the public. They're currently going, and the charge in the executive order is to see that plan out. And then we have a wildfire resilience category as well, where we're really looking to scale the implementation of our 20-year resiliency strategy, which of course connects to you all as well, and looking at also scaling our strategies for building fire adapted communities. And so those are the provisions in that section. So these bullets are really about the substance of the executive order of what we would like to see accomplished. What also is in the executive order is the manner in which we would like to see this accomplished. And so we have a leadership team that we have convened with representatives from all of our natural resource agencies to discuss implementation of the EO. So essentially, we are all going to be discussing and talking about how we're advancing these things and being able to raise our challenges and opportunities together in a space. That's also the venue that's going to help lead the development of work plans. So every agency will have a work plan to discuss how they are, or to identify how they are advancing the objectives of the executive order. The requirement of the executive order is that those work plans are shared with their boards and commissions and discussed in a public venue with opportunity for public comment as well. We suspect that that shouldn't necessarily be the only space where you're getting public conversation about those work plans, but it is a requirement that that does happen in that space. We are also convening, we have not done this yet, but the EO requires the convening of a leadership team, a board leadership team, so members of our boards and commissions that can help advise on implementation of the executive order. That is a component that we are going to be putting together in the next several months as well. And then there is a reporting obligation, and the last piece in there is also looking at key performance metrics. So the KPMs that you all have, I think we've heard this from a number of our agencies, they aren't necessarily always the most useful metrics to track the things that we think are important now to track. So we are working with DAS to work with our agencies in considering updates to our key performance measures. And I believe that's something that you all have already initiated or had conversations on. So that's wonderful as well. So that's a little bit in the how we do our work. You'll see similar elements in that section in both of the EOs, because we are, again, trying to make sure that we're staying well coordinated around this work. What we have done, and I think you'll see more public outreach around this soon, is that we've gotten a facilitator organization to help with our resilience attribute process, and we are going to have kind of a multi-day process that we put together for developing those that will have public input opportunities, and we're going to be bringing some outside perspectives to that table to help give some guidance to the agencies about how we should advance that work, while recognizing that it is ultimately going to be a state agency product that we use. But we do want to make sure that we're kind of getting the best thinking on it before we finalize it. And so we're currently planning to kind of have that conversation in March. And the idea would be that we'd have those attributes in place by hopefully the end of spring to guide the work. A challenge that we have is that, part of the value of the work plans is that they're supposed to be done on a cadence that will inform budget planning, will inform maybe legislative engagement. We're in a little bit of a wonky space because of when we issued the executive order for this cycle. So we may end up having to put some work plans together in a little bit of an expedited way for the first go, maybe before the attributes are done, just to make sure that we're in a position to be able to inform, again, the budget and maybe the long session legislative planning processes. So that's the current plan. And then again, we have our lead agency team meeting. We're going to be planning to put the board team together. Hopefully in the next month or two would be when we'd be finalizing that. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Do you want me to, or do you want to?
Are you?
Oh, I can conclude with that, and happy to have conversations.
Good afternoon, Chandra. Welcome back.
Thanks, Liz.
I have a question about point 4, lead by example, the walk. And you talked about leaning into climate resiliency strategies. Can you give an example of that, and just also explain what we think about resiliency now, and that how you see a shift as those are built out? What are an example, and then
So
what are we trying to get to?
Thank you, Liz, for the questions. So for instance, for the lead by example, I mean, there's a number of examples that I would have now to illustrate. And again, I wouldn't know them all, right? We're prompting some creative thinking with our agencies. But for instance, ODFW manages wildlife areas, right? And so there are some innovative management approaches where, again, you are using drought tolerant seeds, let's say, for things that you are planting, right? So you're considering climate resistant species for things that you're doing to minimize invasives as well on the property. Or we're thinking about our water rights that we have for those wildlife areas and where those are likely to be resilient into the future, or do we need secondary sources, or are those maybe more appropriate to put in streams? Sometimes, that's the case in wildlife areas. So it's thinking about the management objective is to manage that wildlife area. But if there's a way to do it that makes those lands more resilient over time, maybe the water sources that are feeding that wildlife area more resilient over time, we're going to consider those sorts of strategies. Another example, this is again, ODFW is doing a resiliency review for its hatcheries. So all of its facilities, because again, they use water sources, some of which are going to be very hot into the future and may not sustain the operations that they have there, right? So they have to think really critically about their changing environment and where it makes sense to have hatcheries and where it doesn't because of climate. And if there's anything that they can do to think about, I'd say, multiple objectives as well. Like maybe not having hatchery on a system anymore, it actually builds health and of other objectives, health of that stream, something like that. We're looking at that also with our parks facilities. Some of those are very close to areas that are dealing with erosion, coastal erosion, and the facilities. So it's not just about facilities, it's more about the lands and waters that are in and around facilities. But are there practices that they can implement now that reduce the risk of erosion? And I think we've found that there are, and can we scale that? So it's those sorts of things. I'm sorry, you asked a second question. I can't remember what it was. Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes, welcome back, Chandra. Two questions. What's proposed here is quite consistent with our vision for Oregon's forests, which you were part of that development. And so first question is, how obvious should this EO language and the vision for Oregon forests be in the day-to-day operations and management activities of ODF so that they can be held accountable for actually taking this seriously? And then the second question is, what's in place to make this durable beyond the next 4 years?
Great question. Great questions. So the first around accountability, I think what we are hoping, number one, you'll notice in here, there isn't a whole lot of extra planning, right? Like we are acknowledging that our agencies have done a lot of work. Our boards and commissions have done a lot of work to put plans in place that are going to be very germane to advancing the things in this executive order. So we want implementation of those things. We want identification of the things that are going to move the needle the most, consistent with the broader objectives of the EO, and we want those things done. So the implementation mechanism is the work plan, where we are hoping to see connection points to the executive order, and some of those things I expect will be, the governing documents, other documents they have. I know you have a climate and carbon plan. Clearly, you're thinking about your FMP, you're thinking about your HCP, like all of these things, like this should be a lens to, I would hope, everything that the department is doing right now. In fact, that is the requirement. And that you see the tangible thing that's going to be advanced in the work plan. And that's the way that we're holding them to account. And then we also have the collective reporting, like we're expecting the report back to you all. And frankly, we're expecting that we'll have to do a report back to the legislature as well. They've expressed a strong interest in this executive order, which we presented to some committees a few weeks back in legislative ledge days. So that's at least our goal for accountability. The other piece would, of course, be the KPMs. We're hoping to align some of those things in a way that does attach to items that are probably more relevant to the current plans that we have together. Some of the things we have in our KPMs are not really attached to those sorts of things. So if those become more meaningful, that's another space for that. The durability piece, I think, clearly executive orders are usually not top of mind. Other governors' executive orders are sometimes not top of mind for new governors. So I can't say that this executive order would be the binding thread going forward. Our hope, though, is that what it's really trying to do is develop a knitting together, if you will, of the existing plans and strategies we have out there, right? Like the attribute development process, the connection points, and the relationships that we're facilitating with the leadership team, those don't go away, hopefully, right? And we're not doing a lot of new stuff here. We're just saying this is really important and you have to move it forward, And so part of that's just kind of getting invested in some of these existing mechanisms, like you said, maybe it's the vision or the carbon plan or whatever it is, right? Where you get the wheels in motion in a way that makes sense and in some cases are really well coordinated with other agencies that have a stake in that too. So there's kind of a joint investment. The other piece that could be durable, hopefully, again, is if we are, I mean, my hope is that this does generate interest outside of the state enterprise, depending on how we advance the work. So you may see at varying times, maybe, interest from the federal government, interest from private partners, interest from, again, even our state legislature, right, in terms of where we can push additional investment. And so some of those threads might be more durable too.
Thank you.
So, Sandra, I've got a question sort of around the nexus between this executive order and other state priorities. And I'll throw an example at you in terms of keeping working lands working.
Yeah.
If we were to have some low-value timberlands or low-value grazing lands turned into solar farms, is that an example of working lands remaining working from your perspective?
Geez, why do you have to give me the hard ones? I'm going to start broader and then I'll funnel down. There's an FAQ that attaches to this executive order that highlights it in a broad way, the way that the governor is viewing what are multiple objectives that she has advanced in various executive orders, various places, right? We have a housing goal, of course. We have renewable energy goals, which you will see in the subsequent EOs. We have natural resource goals. We recognize that there's some tension there, sometimes a lot of tension there, of course. And we're not saying that that's not going to exist or continue to exist. But we do think you can advance all of the objectives in some way if you can be very transparent and clear again about the trade-offs, right? Because in some cases, there's going to be natural resource value in a place, and we're going to say there's natural resource value here, but in the scheme of resilient attributes, it's on the lower end than maybe a different piece of property. But we know that there's a very high need for renewable energy here, or for whatever, right? It's a very prime location. Well, sometimes then that balance is going to win out and the renewable energy goal will be advanced. So I would say that, I don't know that I'd call that working, but I would say that it's going to advance a different goal of the state, right?
Yes or no?
Oh, sorry. You know me, Jim. Only long-winded responses.
Keith, go ahead.
Chandra, welcome back to the Board of Forestry.
Thank you, Heath.
Really hard question.
I recall this.
I did want to make regarding the durability question.
Mhm.
It seems this board has not yet adopted a forest management plan for state forests, and we have not finally received a habitat conservation plan approval or an incident take permit. When you look at the habitat conservation areas that will be protected under the new forest management plan, it's a pretty extraordinary decision by this board to pursue that. I would like to think that provided that we can get that HCP across the line, that those investments will be durable.
Yeah.
I think give us some hope that we might be able to attain these objectives.
Yes, thank you for that, Heath. I very much agree with that as well. One thing I'll note, because it has come up in the context of the HCP, there's I think we put in here, and I don't have it in front of me, but we acknowledge that we need to think about a baseline, right, when we're thinking about meeting our goals. And we don't establish it here. We ask our interagency team to do that, and we also ask them to think about what sorts of actions would be qualifying And part of what we want them to think about when they do that is the durability of an action and its potential to produce other benefits, right? So it's trying to get to, we need to have some assurance that whatever investment we're making, you're right, does play out for a period that is meaningful for resilience and that also has a likelihood of doing more than just one thing, right? Because again, that's unfortunately the stage that we're in. We need to see our investments yield a lot. And so for us, that is, the HCP is not finalized yet. In my perspective, it's not durable yet until we get it over the finish line, right? And I think it's a really meaningful step. Clearly, I was involved in that vote, and I know that was a very hard one. But that would be something that would seem to advance the objectives of the CO.
Are you okay if you go, we allotted a half hour, are you okay for?
Oh, yeah. I'll hang out all day, Jim.
All right, just want to respect your time.
So, hi, Chandra. Good to see you.
Nice to see you, Jim.
Similar question, kind of Heath. How does the PFA, I mean, you're probably expecting this.
Yeah.
And kind of that baseline and how I would assume that would be very important, the 10 over 10 or 10 by 10.
Yeah.
But how do you think that will be, that work and that legislation?
Again, with the hard questions. No, so I'm not going to step out in front of the team, but what I will say is that the terms that were in there were intentionally a little bit broader, right? Like it's not just a protect, there are a lot of campaigns out there, 30 by 30, things like that, that are looking for protective designations, which of course would qualify here too. It's intended to look at the broader category of things that would build resilience and again, do it in some way that's durable. So I would, a lot of the things that are, of course, being advanced in the PFA, if that gets to a point of completion, I think are consistent with the things that we're looking to advance here. But I will not get out too far ahead of the interagency team. We left it vague for a reason because we wanted them to have the opportunity to to be thoughtful about it. We wanted to make sure that just kind of those broad parameters of items that we wanted to be part of the consideration were in there. And otherwise, we're going to still have a conversation about it.
Yeah, and similarly, hopefully that HCP is timely approved such that the legislation doesn't roll back all of those conservation.
We are working very hard to work with the services right now to keep it a timeline.
Graham, go ahead.
Likewise, welcome back, Chandra. You alluded to the sort of a nexus with the KPMs that the department is, and you are in the middle, right? We are, that is the agenda item before and after you today.
Oh, great.
So perfect timing. I'm guessing that you haven't worked with the department yet on that, or have those conversations.
Department of Forestry?
Yes.
No.
Okay. So since we're in the middle of that right now, do you have any words of advice or thoughts on KPM development? Because that is what we are doing right now.
Oh, geez, that's another hard one. No, I mean, the best I have is that the executive order is a filter, and that we want the KPMs to be relevant to the priorities that we have today and that are meaningful indicators to track progress, and so I don't think I can say much more than that other than, the governor is very interested in accountability. She's very interested in being able to do more than put words on a paper and show that in a way that resonates and folks can understand. And I think it's also just in my own experience, right? It's things that we need to be able to reasonably track and do that with some level of confidence, right? Because metrics that we don't actually really have the information on or are, which I think it feels like we've had some of that in the past with maybe the forest management plan where we put some metrics in there that are really kind of outside of our control or the control of this agency to really get the information to track. So it's got to be things that are meaningful for this agency too, Yeah, I would just say the executive order is definitely a lens. It should be a lens. And we would hope to hear that too. We'll be chatting a little bit more, I think, Kate, right, with your team about the executive order as the leadership team gets grounded and moves forward that work.
I wanted to say from the agency standpoint, so Tim's been our point of contact on this and working with Chandra and that group she talked about. So as you saw, Tim's work is also part of the KPMs, part of all these different pieces of it and our strategic planning piece. And so for that deputy role, that's going to be critical moving forward. And then, and John Tokarzik is also helping to bolster Tim's work there, which has so many other linkages back to, like, I think somebody mentioned the climate plan and a lot of different pieces. So we're aligning all of those works internally to engage on this. And the other piece too, like you talked about, Chandra, there's a lot of existing things, and one of them is our 20-year strategy for resiliency and fire pieces. And so those are some pieces that have just like are going to be able to be elevated as I talked about earlier today, where we've got new dollars, we're getting new plans together to move those forward. And I think those are going to be significant contributions as well for just a resilient landscape from wildfire. I'll leave it with that.
Thanks, Kate. I guess I just know in advance of next meeting, we are hoping to maybe drill a level deeper, kind of based on your all's thoughts about your strongest connection points. Like when you read this, what resonates to you, maybe what doesn't resonate with you, what efforts that the board is undertaking. And we've already identified a number of them, and we might be able to get to the next level with those. Do you see as being really important connection points? One thing I'm really excited about with this is that we do have, again, this unifying thread that is supposed to bind our agencies and our boards and commissions in what is going to be a continuous dialogue. We should be back in front of you to discuss this at, semi-regular opportunities. You'll hear from the department in a semi-regular way on this as well. And then you're going to have a connection point to the board, commission leadership team too. So I'm very excited about that, and hopefully you are as well. I know this might look like just another effort for you all to have to work on, but I think it's a positive step. Thank you for letting me join you, and I'm excited to join you again. I guess that would be the other thing. If you have specific questions or things that you want to make sure we get into in a little more depth, and you want to provide us that in advance of next month, I'm happy to take that suggestion as well.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming. Look
Nice
forward
to see you all.
All
Thanks.
right. Okay, we'll go right back to Tim and crew on our KPM session.
All right. Good afternoon. Josh Bernard, Forest Resources Division Chief again for the record. Moving on to KPM 4, that's also a Forest Resources Division KPM. It's been focused on our urban and community forestry program. And historically, that program's been primarily funded with general fund and provides assistance to local governments, municipalities, and counties. And the current performance metric, I think, is set at a target of like 50% or something like that. And it's been set there for a long time, and we haven't been able to achieve that. And the way that measurement is based on is some attributes that cities have. I believe whether they have a planner or they have a tree ordinance plan, they got to have 2 out of 4 components, which we don't really control. So with the size of that program and kind of focusing on those things, didn't really seem like that KPM was set up to be in our control or that we could affect that. And so the suggestion here is that we would pause reporting on that particular KPM. And then between now and not this upcoming biennium, but the following biennium, 2931, is when we would actually try to repropose some sort of new KPM. It would be tied into both the landscape resiliency process and the executive order at this point, given that's still kind of unfolding. So that's the recommendation in the moment on that particular KPM.
Yes, I don't quite understand. It looks like the legislature, wants to have this information. And you're saying since the department doesn't really control, then it's not our role to provide the information. I think there's a difference between, you're seeing yourselves as being judged by progress or lack of progress. the question here, they want to know what the status is. And is there anybody better to report that than the department? I mean, I don't think this is all that big an issue, but there is a difference, again, between a request for reporting and an expectation of specifically of I don't know, anyhow.
Yeah, and maybe to share a little bit more, you know, the thought process is that maybe there's something that would be better reflective of what that program does as we look forward and we merge things into landscape resiliency. A fair bit of their work in the urban environment kind of contributes to that holistically. So as we look at these other pieces, the executive order, and there's further down in the discussion, there's another KPM that could potentially be revised to focus on a landscape resiliency type metric. So that's kind of the thinking, you know, but as far as where we go with it, we've been reporting on that KPM for a long time. And if, you know, when we talk to LFO and they want us to keep reporting on that, that's like muscle memory for our department staff, and we'll just keep executing it in the same way possible. But I feel like there could be some better value.
Do we have any reason to believe anybody's paying attention?
Just a reaction, not a suggestion. By parsing out urban forests, given what we just heard from Chandra, can have a huge impact on local climate in urban areas, especially for underserved communities. It seems to me that it might be losing some key information for a lot of our constituents by then lumping that into landscape resiliency, where healthy forests are the focus. And so just an observation. I guess I need to think a little bit more about how that urban heat island effect could be mitigated within the context of broader landscape planning.
Well,
Question now, because I'll ask this question now in a little bit more neutral KPM than the ones that are to come. I'm still a little confused about our posture. So the recommendation from staff here is that we pause reporting. Are you asking us to join in that recommendation to the legislature that they direct you to pause reporting? You know what I mean? Like, what's the order of operations here? What role are we playing in this decision to pause reporting on this KPM?
No, I appreciate that, Heath. I think, so what we would really like to do, so as we have reviewed and struggle with these and how do we report and what does it mean to us as we do our work, we've been wanting to get this in front of you for a while now as a board. And I think what we're taking in today is here's some suggestions we have. We'd like to hear your feedback as you know, that reflective piece of representing Oregonians, as Jim talked about earlier, and saying like, this might be your recommendation, but here's the feedback and concerns we're seeing or other things to think about. And then we're going to go back into the washing machine of this conversation, think about this some more and think about how to do that better or differently. And then, as you suggested earlier, maybe we have a smaller subcommittee that comes back and says, we've looked at these, we've taken your input, here's some things we're thinking about. And some of those decisions, like I said earlier, we're going to move 3 of these things ahead by April. And then we know we have additional work to do on other ones, because I think that's, as Chandra talked about, and I think why it was really important to have her here, even for a short amount of time, there is a linkage to the budgeting process, the direction for the EO and all that.
But again, ultimate product is what? It is ODF recommending to the legislature that these be ODF's key performance measures.
Yeah.
Is that the product?
Yes.
And that recommendation is in the hands of the state forester. And so you are asking us as a board for input on your recommendation to the legislature. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so it's not even the fact that this is like a voting thing for this board. It's more along the lines of we are trying to give you input and we're going to incorporate that as best you are able in your recommendation to the legislature.
Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful.
You know, on this particular one, I think Brenda is right. This KPM really doesn't directly address a goal that any of us care about. I mean, who cares what percent? In a certain way, what we would care about was there's some other KPM in here, which is really about more healthy neighborhoods with more trees, and so I think, speaking for myself, pursuing something like that eventually, whether it's top priority now or not, I don't know, but makes a lot of sense to me.
I would echo that. And I think, this is to me, it feels like a classic holdover from, many years ago when Kristen was in this role. She was really trying to get cities on board. I think the mission of the Urban Community Forestry program has changed. There's a lot more staff, there's a lot more money, there's Emerald Ash Borer, there's a lot more, there's different things that they're doing these days. So I would agree that this question isn't all that relevant. But I think urban and community forests are a big elephant in the room and something that we should be paying attention to and finding good ways to track. Whether that fits into a landscape resiliency KPM, I'm not sure. Some sort of state condition assessment of our urban and community forests, I think, would be really relevant. Exactly how that was conducted, I'm not quite sure, but whether it's from the EO or our vision document or the climate change and carbon plan or just good policy, having healthy and robust urban forest canopy is incredibly important. So finding some way to measure that and communicate that. I mean, I think this is really a communication tool. Communicate that, I think, would be really valuable.
Yeah, and my fear here is when we say essentially are supporting pausing here, that it then goes off into the ether and never reappears, and that would be unacceptable.
Just want to point out that if you do decide to keep something like this, but more in the line of what Jim is talking about, there are both LiDAR and Landsat imagery that can characterize forest cover within city growth boundaries. And if you start to see that increasing over time, then that may be a good trend.
And I'm not going to add a lot more. I just want to pile on just a little bit. I think those are excellent ideas. Brenda has an excellent idea. And I think there's a way of building this and not losing some sort of a measure in this world of urban forestry.
Yeah, we can go on to the next one then.
All right, good afternoon. Chair Kelly, members of the board, State Forester Skinner. I'm Michael Wilson, State Forest Division Chief. So KPM number 5 has been is the state forest total revenue. So the percent increase in total revenue produced by state forests. It's been problematic for us over the years because it's controlled by exogenous market forces. Right? We can offer a certain amount of timber, but we do not control the price. We also don't control the harvesting patterns of our purchasers completely. There's a 3-year contract window. And so looking at this on an annual basis, it actually varies quite a lot and isn't really within our control. So what we're going to propose is changing it to actually be in alignment with our annual operations plans, with the amount of planned volume, then the amount that was actually prepared and ultimately sold, and then also the delivered volume to date. The delivered volume to date is a little less tied to our actual performance in auctioning a certain amount of timber, but it's also interesting information to have, I think, as we see an AOP fulfilled over the years that it happens. So anyway, it makes it more directly tied to what we do and our performance. It does not set a harvest level or anything like that. It just says this is the AOP, and yeah, we went out and we accomplished it. There will be some pieces in there where you know, as it tracks over time, there will be times when we don't meet it quite on schedule. Again, I'll go back to fire season 2024, and we lost a quarter there because our folks were out on fire and everything. So we got kind of behind. But this is meant to track the ultimate accomplishment of that annual operations plan.
As you might expect, I have some thoughts on this. So kind of two things. One, three things, and they'll be quick. One is that I think the objective here with increasing revenue over time wasn't necessarily, you know, with an eye toward absolute revenue. I think it's probably toward an eye toward the agency remaining solvent. And I think that if this KPM were to be substantive, that is to be creating an objective that's related to some policy, you know, rather than just did you hit your AOP, which you set yourself, the target could be, you know, is the Forest Development Fund adequately funded? And we can come back to that if you'd like to. It could be in the sense of an additional KPM. But to me, that is a relevant question that the legislature should be tracking. Is the agency solvent? Is the Forest Development Fund stable or increasing? And another way to style it would be, this brings us back to, do they have the 6 to 12-month reserve that we want to see as a policy? And so that's one comment. The other comment I would make on this KPM is that unlike, you know, our performance measures that we are putting in place, this is the legislature's performance measure. We are merely recommending to Kate that she recommend to the legislature that they adopt a particular performance measure. In the context of the Habitat Conservation Plan and the Forest Management Plan that we anticipate approving this summer, I think that this is one area where the legislature could actually create some expectations around what they would like to see. And in my view, I don't think it's adequate that we have, did you meet the AOP or not, which you set yourself? You know, at least hypothetically, the agency could make it very easy to hit their AOP with offering very low volume objectives. I think what we would like to rather see is have the legislature place some expectation on the agency about what those volumes would be. Of course, in compliance with all of the conservation measures and other ecological uplift associated with the HCP, this to me is a perfect place to include, we would like to see the stepped approach that we have seen from the performance measure development that we as a board were considering. This is an opportunity for the legislature to do that, and I don't think there's anything handicapping their ability.
I have a different approach or thought on this because I'm a little bit concerned about this. I understand why this is being recommended. All that makes sense. But what you measure is what you incent, essentially. And so if you're incenting a certain harvest volume, then it motivates the department to maintain that kind of harvest volume, even when it doesn't make fiscal sense, even when prices are super low, and that a private operator would say, "Whoa, we're not going to do that." And so, from the perspective of sort of protecting the taxpayers' investment and being as fiscally sound operator, I don't have a answer here because there's arguments both ways, but I feel like a measuring outcome or just harvest volumes is going to end up catering to the mills and some other community pressures that aren't necessarily in the best interest of the state and all the taxpayers of the state. So take that for what it's worth.
I would only say, without engaging whether we should or shouldn't do that, I would offer that has been a deliberate policy choice by this body in the past. That is to say, even flow comes with other policy benefits. That is to say to the community, expectations around agency activity and funding. I don't know that having ODF try to time markets one, they've not been historically great at that, and two, that competes with some other policy objectives this body has had historically.
And by the way, I don't disagree with you. You know, if we can't have a say in harvest volumes, if the legislature wants to, that is
Yeah.
her view.
So, so Gate, I think this is a perfect opportunity, like what he said, to make a recommendation to the legislature to enact, or at least put an idea of targets related to harvest levels, you know, coming from the legislature. I think that's, and to his point, we've walked through scenarios here, which, and that could be a future for state forests. And so this just looks like a great place to do that, you know, have the legislature bring that forward. You know, to Jim's, you know, any kind of performance measure, there's always can be explanations of variances related to finance. I mean, we're a reasonable body, and if markets go, you know, I mean, every performance measure has a certain level of, you know, the opportunity of staff to explain. You know, Mike just gave one, you know, fire, they couldn't get the sales out. I mean, those things will happen and those explanations can come forward. But I don't know that it would preclude us from making a recommendation to set something for the legislature to set those expectations.
Yeah, I mean, if the legislature was telling us, here's an expectation, then we can come and say, okay, we'll set up a performance measure that we'll report on to you. But I think we're kind of at a place where we don't know exactly how to measure what they want. Perhaps. Sure, go ahead.
I have a couple thoughts on this, but I guess I have just a clarifying question. We keep talking about the legislature. Who is this actually going to, who approves it, and who looks at it? I think that would be helpful for me to understand before I make some more comments on this.
So this is part of our budget package that goes to the governor's office in December. It'll be reviewed by CFO and the governor's office staff and to the GRB. And then from there, it goes ultimately to the legislative fiscal office, who assigns or approves or denies the modifications to our KPM. So it's a legislative fiscal office is the end say in the process.
It's not the natural resources sub.
There's not a committee that,
I believe the proposals would be part of our budget process as it passes through the sub, which is our LFO would be a part of that conversation.
But it's a legislative.
Yeah.
So thank you. That's helpful. And I guess I would tend to agree on some level that there is an opportunity to use this as a tool to have that conversation with the legislature about state forests, because we get lots of signals from the legislature and from the governor's office about things that should be done on forest lands, and there are trade-offs. And this is a way to highlight those trade-offs with some of the other decision makers in the state besides the board here. So I'm generally curious about, Heath, your points about how that could be used well. I think there's an interesting opportunity there, especially if it could maybe go in front of a slightly wider audience of the legislature in some way. If we could get a committee hearing on this particular one, it seems interesting. It seems like an interesting opportunity to engage in these trade-offs with some of the other decision makers in the state that hold some other cards that we don't hold. So I'm interested and curious there. Just a quick clarification on what you have written right here. I'm trying to understand what the measure of performance actually is. Is the performance strictly a report on meeting objective? Is that what's being shown here?
Yeah, so it'd be a meet or exceed sort of a objective. Yep.
That seems like a good thing to report.
Yep.
I don't know that rises to the level of a KPM. But nonetheless seems good to report far and wide. And I've seen versions of these reports from you over the years, and I think they're always helpful to sort of set the record straight on how the sales are going. That in itself seems meaningful. I think there's some more conversation about how this a version of something around state forest harvest and revenue could be used
Maybe,
more broadly.
you know, I'd like for us to try to get through all of these, and then, you know, maybe it's tomorrow morning when we do what we had on there this afternoon as reflection. And I think we have offered up enough confusion on this particular topic one, so we can move to the next. We okay with that? All right. Yeah, the next one looks easy.
Okay, so my turn. So good afternoon, Chair Kelly, State Forester Skinner, other members of the board. So for the record, my name is Michael Curran. I'm the Fire Protection Division Chief for ODF. So KPM number 6 is tied to air quality protection for our smoke management program. This is one of those KPMs, as we did our review in August and as we work through these as a division, that we felt this is one we could delete. With this one being tied to air quality, we felt it's better suited probably for another state agency, i.e. DEQ or Oregon Health Authority. And with recent changes within the smoke management rules dating back to 2019, we're actually trying to increase the pace and scale of burning more and find more opportunities to get burning done near those populated areas, to where that's really kind of driving us needing that this KPM is just outdated for us. I think moving forward, if there's an interest, we could have a KPM tied around prescribed fire, to try to have us put together some metrics that we are increasing that pace and scale. And we've been given very clear direction from the legislature the last 2 long sessions to do that. I would say we're kind of in the middle of trying to update our policies, our procedures, and the implementation side of it to try to thread this needle the right way. So we have better public awareness of the value and the benefits of prescribed fire out on the landscape to get more done. And I think as we continue to work through this moving forward, we'll probably have some better metrics to tie into to be able to have something tied to prescribed fire if there was that interest. But for right now, we would recommend that we delete this KPM moving forward.
Go ahead.
Removing the KPM or changing the KPM, because it sounds like something is simple. I don't know. I'm making something up here, but acres of prescribed fire burn per year and set that target as high as you think you can possibly, maybe not even attain it, so that it kind of raises the level of awareness for local communities, for politicians, for others, that this is something that needs to be, need to pay attention to.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. I think really for now, it would be just delete it more because like I mentioned earlier, we're working through another updated smoke management rule review. And we're just getting our certified burn manager up off the ground and running and trying to move forward. And there's still a lot of things for us to do to increase that understanding and awareness of prescribed fire, to where I think we need to get a little more work in place and try to get some better metrics in place so we can get a good KPM that we know is achievable. I just don't know if we're quite there yet, but again, I think moving forward long term, we definitely can get a KPM back in place that's tied to prescribed fire fairly easily.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
I would just echo that the sooner we get a KPM around prescribed fire, the better. And I mean, just looking at all these dates, I mean, we're talking about 27, 29, you know, by the time this KPM actually rolled around needed to be reported on, I'm guessing you'd probably have most of that work done. If we waited until you had the work done and then found our window to update the KPM, we got 2 more years before we get a report on it. So just looking at the lag in all of this work and anticipating that, I'm wondering if there's a possibility to get it in there, with the and understanding that you'd get there by then. Just a thought and a question.
Jim? I just, so we're forward leaning on this. And so if we are going to indeed shift to prescribed fire, just a reminder, and you probably own this, Michael and Kyle, is that the Western Fire Science Labs is doing some fabulous work on not only the type of prescribed burning, but prescribed burning and thinning and the value, the co-benefits that you get out of that. So just to, in the interest of really making this durable in the future, just some great science that's coming out of the lab.
Yeah, thank you for that.
All right. Go to the next one.
All right. For the record, again, Josh Bernard, Forest Resources Division Chief. KPM 7, percentage of private forest land managed at or above the Forest Practices Act standard. So looks at both industrial and non-industrial lands and what those are managed, how many of those are managed under some other type of plan or agreement at the level or beyond the FPA. And so, you know, a couple thoughts as we were reviewing this. One is we have the compliance audit, you know, that we do that's referenced in KPM 3. So if that's in place, we're doing, you know, an audit around the state to ensure those folks are complying. But as we move forward towards an HCP, that will be a plan, right? Another plan that all those folks are a part of at that point. So to continue reporting on those other certification pieces might become a moot point at the time we get an HCP. So recommendation for the moment is to pause reporting, wait and see what happens with that. And depending on what happens with that HCP in 2931, which is even further out than, you know, the next session's timeline, is when we would determine what action we would need to take there. So that's KPM 7.
Josh, I understand a lot is changing, but I was really struck by the language in what you guys wrote here. The percentage of private forest lands being managed above regulatory standards is not a reflection of agency performance as its voluntary landowner choice. There's just language that's pushing an agency like us in the executive order from the governor. It's just diametrically opposed to that language. It is saying we want agencies to go out there and, you know, working with their constituency and all to you know, really make significant change. So I just disagree with that claim. I think it is absolutely the agency's responsibility to be out there with programs supporting landowners who are trying to go above and beyond. And, you know, the reporting question here and all the changes and the points you're making here, I get all of that. But I really object to that language, that that's not your job. I would argue it absolutely is.
And I would say I agree. It is our job. But looking at that in terms of like a performance reporting metric as we place the HCP in, anyhow, that was the thought process.
Okay. You know, it's a little bit separate. It's just, it was just really noticeable to me to be reading the executive orders and then seeing that particular language in here. What we want to do with this reporting, happy to hear other people's thoughts here. I don't particularly have a recommendation or thought.
Yeah, I mean, like one question I have is just, you know, it's not obvious to me that these certifications relative to the PFA commitments will result in larger commitments, right? Or different management per se. I mean, when you're managing under an HCP blessed by the services, it's already a very conservative approach. And so this kind of raises again that 100% question I brought up earlier. You may not, you know, you may be there. And so the question is what's our expectation of the agency in terms of pitching ever more? Is it, you know, Peter Doherty used to raise that question. It was like, at what point are you like done? You know, at what point did you do it? Are we acting sufficiently protective? And I'm not certain, you know, one, I'm confident we're not done. So that's fine. But I'm not certain it's necessarily definitionally true that ODF's job is to try to get people to manage even more conservatively when they have otherwise satisfied the biological and species objectives that we have.
Yeah, I'm saying my interpretation of, you know, reading through the executive order, they're trying to tell agencies like us that they want us to be out there making big efforts to make real change. And I think that's, it seems like a reasonable interpretation that they're pushing us to try to do things, especially to encourage voluntary work beyond what's statutorily required, even under the PFA. Brenda?
Yeah, and along those lines, and I can't remember the acronym within the PFA. Is it a PFAP? It's the private forest is allowed to alter the practice. Thank you. Where that can be used to restore part of that riparian system or accelerate the development of certain things with appropriate oversight and accountability. And I reflect on the OWEB work where active management is regularly used to try to accelerate the development of certain characteristics within riparian areas. To me, it seems like, and consistent with the executive order, acres within PFAP that have accelerated the development of desired for future condition within riparian areas. That, to me, that would be a key performance measure because it would indicate just what impact the agency is having on recovering ecological functions within some of these systems. Because if you take a young plantation and you draw a line around it and you leave it alone at 400 trees per acre, you're not going to get the desired future conditions you want for a very, very, very long time. So that's a situation I think ODF can help with in the future.
So if I might, just for clarity, when this references plans, it's talking like SFI and FSC. Those are the typical pieces we're reaching out and tracking. So it's at that certification level. Another thing that we do, and so when I say it's our job to help folks, there's a mechanism for stewardship agreements, right? So somebody wants to go out and they have a specific plan for their property and want to make certain agreements with us. We still do that. That's still an option in our rules. So that's at the level when we're talking about plans under the current KPM. So that's what we track and report currently.
Yeah, but FSC and SFI are quite different in their performance measures. And so I appreciate that, Josh, but the devil's in the details.
Other thoughts from board members on this?
Well, for the record, I'm fine.
Okay with pausing?
Yeah, exactly. I'm okay with pausing on this.
Yeah, I think there's a lot here. I'm fine with pausing it right now because I think there's a much larger conversation about how to measure some of this stuff. I don't know that the question currently being asked is all that helpful. So pause for now is fine.
Yeah, you're hearing, I think, is some consensus about pausing, but again, there's something here that should not be lost in the ether.
I'm fine with pausing it, but I would like to see incorporated in it some mechanism for providing incentives to private landowners to make these changes.
Okay. Sufficiently confused by our feedback? And then we can move on to the next one.
All right. I have the next one as well. I have several here. KPM 8, so forest stream water quality. So this is a report that focuses on the percent of monitored sites. And this is one of those that focused on 3 different pieces. So it's increasing trends, decreasing trends, and the percent of monitored forest stream sites with water quality in good to excellent condition. And that's actually a DEQ report that we work with. And so I think both here at the board and at the legislature, when we've asked in the past, like what has triggered those different trends, even for us working with DEQ, that's been hard to discern like what actually caused a particular metric to change. And so again, this one's linked. If you read the description that we have here, there's quite a bit of text, but ultimately, right, we have an HCP that's going to be in place. We're going to have a lot of reporting that we need to do to the federal services over the next 50 years. And we're thinking we would like to pause this and link appropriate metrics around water quality to the HCP, but we really need to see what those required reporting metrics are and kind of match all those processes up so we can do one and the same for the federal entities and then for the legislature as well.
Brenda, go ahead.
Okay, but climate continues to change and temperature would seem to be an important factor. And we have, I think, some impaired waters due to temperature issues, do we not? Yeah. So I'm not sure why we're pausing this one. Isn't this important information to have, especially in a time of such rapid change?
Ben, you want-
I don't want to shortchange your ability to answer that, but I have some more thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think, as we walk through all these KPMs, right? Both from, I think, the interest of the board and the interest of Legislative Fiscal Office, they asked us to look at all this. And so, for the moment, if we're looking at changing that in the future, the one recommendation we could make was to pause that at the moment until we see where the HCP comes out. I mean, in the interim, the other option is we continue to report on that until HCP is completed and we know what those reporting metrics look like. So, yeah.
I'd like to see you continue to report it.
I was going to sort of second that. And I agree, like with the last one, I think there's a lot of work to do here. And I look to sort of reframe this in a new set of questions. I don't think it's going to look very good if we stop reporting on this, just in the court of public opinion. I don't know how much of a lift it is to keep reporting on this, but it seems like it might be okay to sort of put a pin in this and say there's work to do here, but until then, we'll keep reporting what we have been reporting. Unless there's some meaningful reason why that's incredibly onerous. That would, I think, go over better.
I don't want to
Jen.
put words in your mouth, Josh, but I think what I'm hearing from you is we're going to do that. We just need to understand what the metrics are related to the HCP. I mean, so it's a perfect, I think, opportunity to pause the work. I don't think we're saying we're going to stop doing it. It's just, it may be being done through a different method or different, right? That's what you're saying.
So I think it's both, Joe, the way it's currently written, right? So, part of this will be what, LFO says, is that what we want to do, or do we just keep reporting? So, we could have wrote this up and just left it as it is standard and recognize 2 years from now, we may enter into a conversation about that. That's the other way we can characterize it. So, this was our way of flagging that, that's likely to change. We've received questions there on that particular metric, right? And don't have, answers to suggest why one piece of the increasing or decreasing trend changed. And so the thought was to suggest that as one option for the interim without being able to complete the rest of the work on it.
John,
Go ahead.
so Josh, my question is any of this recording, collection, and reporting going to add value or inform what you anticipate will be required in the HCP for any kind of reporting? Does it add value? Can you use it?
I don't feel that it adds value right now. If you're asking relative to the HCP process, it's got its own process that our federal partners will go through. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, my personal opinion on this, everybody's all over the place. It's like, I don't care if they keep doing it or stop doing it. It's always been just kind of a dumb KPM to me. It measures the percentage of the number of streams that are changing, which doesn't, to me, really lead to any policy conclusions. Like, for instance, in the abstract, you could have a lot of them in good shape and not changing, and somehow we're not realizing our target that they continue to change. It's always missed the baseline. And then the other thing is that it's based on this Oregon Water Quality Index, which has never been designed to be like a statistically valid method of characterizing all of Oregon's streams, and it's not consistent one year to the next. And so the deviations that you may have may result from different sites sampled and different objectives. And so it's to me, it's always great. We've got, we have this huge dive in 24 where we go from 16 streams improving to 16% to 5% improving in 24. And it's not a product of the fact that Oregon stream water quality took a dive. It's because the sites we measured were different and it was under different conditions year to year. So I've never thought that this was actually measuring anything useful, and they can continue to do it. But if somebody came to us and said, oh my God, I saw a change in the percentage, you have to do something as a result of the Oregon Water Quality Index, I would say, nah, these numbers aren't real and representing anything real.
I'll summarize, I think, some of the feedback I'm hearing, which is encouraging the department leadership to be thinking defensively in terms of communication with the public here, and not just we're pausing this reporting. And the message is, we're doing a whole lot of reporting on this subject, based on the HCP that we're working on. And I mean, it's just how you handle it, because I can sure see a couple of reporters out there that I know of who would jump on the positive of reporting, and all of a sudden the agency would be looked at with another negative story. So,
Period. And to that
I
end,
think that probably is a thought to keep in mind on each one of these ones where you're recommending pausing reporting. That if that's what it is, where you go ahead, it needs to be nuanced in the messaging.
may I ask very quickly, I mean, ODF doesn't prepare the WQI like results, right? Like, this is just a desktop exercise for you. Like, to me, I frankly, given Jim's concerns, I would think you would continue reporting on this. I mean, it doesn't even matter. Like, you can just continue doing it. It's a desktop exercise, and the results kind of are what they are. I just, as a body, I don't think they carry a lot of gravity, but you can avoid the headline by doing that.
Okay, go on.
All right.
Wait a
K,
minute.
oh,
Time for a break. Yeah, we're just past when we said we'd take a break, so let's just make it a quick break. 10 minutes will be back. What? Back at 3? Yeah, 3:01.
Make a phone call.
We'll continue. Where were we? Let's see. Um, Number 9. That's right. Okay.
All right. Josh Bernard, Forest Resources Division Chief again for the record, and I have KPM 9 as well. So KPM 9 looks at voluntary public and private investments made to create healthy forests. And currently, the focus of that has been stemmed from the Oregon Plan for Salmon and Watersheds. So that was a focus of what private landowners were investing in a measurement each year. And as we track that over time, right, the opportunities I think out there on the landscape, I think there was a significant amount of growth in the beginning, and we've kind of seen that, kind of slow down, and they adjust the KPM on us a little higher each time. And so as we were talking about KPMs, the thought was potentially this could be a landscape resiliency KPM and look at like the investments going into the forest from that landscape resiliency side of things in the future. So again, no action this biennium, it would be a future biennium, but recognizing that there's some work on the executive order, because I think as Tim alluded to, there's some discussion around what does that look like, and even there's discussions around what's actually a metric for landscape resiliency. That seems to be a fairly, acres might not just be the right answer for that in the long term. So this one does say pause reporting again on the top of it. Again, we have muscle memory. If the LFO says we need to keep reporting, we can do that, but that would be redefined into something else that's focused kind of on that broader landscape scale where there's various amounts of funding going into the landscape. So.
We in an afternoon slump, or does anybody? Any comments from anybody? Objections? Okay, I think I'll take that as a silent assent that this makes that the proposal as proposed makes sense. All right.
All right, well, I'll start things up again. So KPM number 10, and we've heard a lot about this, right, recently, State Forest North Coast Habitat, and that's complex forest structure as a percentage of the state forest landscape. And that's complex forest structure as described in our still current forest management plan that, seeks to emulate sort of this older forest habitat in a general sense. So obviously the FMP is going to be changing, as we know, and we also have an HCP involved. And so we really want to kind of update this metric and really have it focus more on the adaptive capacity of our forests. And this is actually intended to fall very much in line with the performance measure that we've described for the FMP for you all around adaptive capacity and deal with the things like stand age, forest composition, the distribution, stand age, density, and so forth, and then also the growth rates and occurrence of legacy structures and a variety of things there. One thing I'll say, front, we thought about, do we want to focus on another habitat objective even more narrowly, like around the covered species? Couple of reasons not to do that. One, it's very narrow. And, this should be, I think, a little bit more broad. But also, I don't want to put the legislature in a position of potentially getting involved with a KPM that really ends up being a factor in our HCP between applicant and services, right? Like if there's a problem with habitat accrual or whatever over time, then that's not a thing that the legislature is involved in, right? That's a thing that we're involved in with the services. So anyway, thought making it a little more general, a little more sort of applicable to adaptive capacity and forest resiliency overall.
Go ahead, Brenda.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Mike. I'm just reflecting on some of the metrics that you described, and one I didn't hear was connectivity. And ODFW, I think, has a pretty big focus on connectivity for species across the state. Is there a way of working with another agency to add a KPM that would benefit both you and another agency?
That's a very good point. Yeah, I think there is. I think there is. Certainly, we're aware of their strategy, their connectivity strategy, and I think that we could work with them to see how that plays into this as well. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know if there's any rules. I mean, obviously, we have things that mix in with DEQ and stuff as well, so I don't see any reason why we couldn't.
Problem with doing this, but I mean, this, the conservation community has been very focused, as you well know, on this. And I've heard your explanations when we've had our monthly meetings, and also I have a different understanding of why these numbers have not gone in the direction that a lot of people think that they should have. But I am real concerned here, again, on trying to operate defensively in our communication with the public and the press and all of this. What can we do about that? I mean, I think about, I think about some sort of briefing, for people who are really interested, to have yourself and Kate, whoever else, and actually, spending an hour with folks, making them have folks that do care, having a deeper understanding of what the forest structure is moving to our state forests, and so that, because I just see some cynicism around, well, that measurement's not. They're doing a terrible job, and they don't want to measure that anymore, and they're exchanging it for something else. Anyhow, just worried about that.
That's a good point. I'll give some thought to the comms that we might apply to this one. I think probably several of these, maybe we should do it as a larger thing. I mean, we put it out there in individual forums, but we could capture it more holistically.
Okay, I've got Heath, Ben, and Liz, and Brenda.
Well, very
Where are
good.
you?
Just
Are you sleepy?
one of in the context of like connectivity and habitat recruitment, et cetera, like, I remember when we were looking at the HCAs and, there's a lot of question about why are these HCAs shaped the way they are, and why are they so big, and why do we have to make such an extraordinary commitment? And one of the answers was connectivity. That is to say, they were deliberately designed to be responsive to those concerns by ODF&W and by the services. And so, the challenge for me at this point is that, so many of these conversations are not oriented around, kind of the celebratory posture relative to that HCP, but rather how it may yet be deficient and how we may need to be doing ever more. And I think another way to approach this, and I don't mean to attribute that posture to anybody here, I mean to attribute it to comments we've received from the public. But another way to approach this is to say, well, we have this ambitious and extraordinary thing we are doing under this HCP approved by the federal services. Why don't we measure our progress against implementation of that HCP, and how is it producing results over time? Those HCAs are going to produce a lot of older structure, and it's going to take decades to realize that. It's a long-term and very expensive investment. And so, to me, the question becomes not, what more can we be doing? Rather, how great are the results that we're producing by implementation of this HCP? And so in that vein, I guess, as just one member of this board, because we're not like voters, everybody's just kind of like throwing things at you. I like your idea of gauging your progress against the metrics and the biological objectives and the goals of the HCP.
Yeah, I'm really happy with this one. This is probably my favorite one we've done so far. I think, I have to say, I have been frustrated for many years with the lack of progress on complex forest structure that has been a thorn in our side. It really has been. And I think Jim is very correct in that we need to be very clear about what we are doing with this new KPM. And I think this is absolutely the change we should be making. And I think, resilience, adaptive capacity of forests that you've laid out here, I think it's still in process. We've been talking about this a lot. There's some work to do to get this right. But this is the right step forwards to have a new way of measuring performance on those forests that's meaningful and important. So I just want to go on the record and say, let's put complex forest structure to the side and let's move on to the future, which is adapt the capacity of our forests. And would be happy to help win that messaging, because I think this is an important message that we need to communicate to a lot of stakeholders. So yeah, I think you have my wholehearted support on this one.
Is it me? Yeah, thank you. Liz Powell, board member. Woohoo. Said it. So I also want to make sure that we're recognizing the contributions of the PFA and the HCP when it is finally finalized, and that we can observe and really understand its contribution, and the connectivity that it can bring. And then, but I also think as we look at connectivity and some of these other things, is that for me, where I come from, is that I want to recognize what we do and the impacts to agents' solvency. I just think that we have yet to see some of the shoe drop on the HCP and maybe the PFA a bit. So I just want us to recognize that there are impacts, and that, you know, while we want to count volume and such like that, we also count nests, we also count riparian boundaries, we also go, so we do count what's important. And I just want to make sure that we are really understanding our incremental cumulative impacts of what we do and our actions to this agency, because so much when we were making these other decisions, especially on the HCP, we were in a different place. We were expecting help from the governor for some of these communities. We were expecting a little bit of a healthy budget, and none of that I don't think has come true. So as we piling, you know, on and trying to do some good things, we need to look at the impact. So that's just my thought.
Yeah, I don't want to throw structure completely out. I'm going to suggest that the KPM be focused on acres of complex early successional, complex mid-successional, and complex late successional forest, and complex being defined by both species composition, that is being multiple species, and structure, having large trees as well as small trees. And that doesn't mean switching everything to uneven age management. It means retaining some trees, living and dead, to provide some of that large tree component that is so important to some of these early successional species. And then tracking the acres in each of those three categories over time. And connectivity is a part of that, but the two are somewhat separate. So maybe there are a couple of KPMs here, one which is collaborative with ODFW and another which is more focused on state forests and providing those successional stages and complex conditions that are important to supporting all the species that occur across state forests.
Brenda, you know, my question for you about that is, like, the forest management plan, by implementing the HCP, will produce particular results, you know, de facto, right? Like, it's, and I can envision a circumstance where, because we're taking a zoned approach and we're harvesting some of the older age classes outside of the HCAs in exchange for these big blocks and connectivity through younger age classes that we produce with the HCAs, I can envision a circumstance where some of those older age classes actually fall in the near term and then grow over the long term. And all of that will be a product of the prescriptions that are in the habitat conservation plan. I'm not opposed to measuring the attributes that you're describing. I actually think we should all have visibility on that. My question for you is, in the context of an agency performance measure, like, what's our expectation there? For me, I felt like the expectation is that they implement the HCP kind of from a high level, that they do it. if all we're doing is kind of tracking numbers about what that implementation produces, that doesn't feel to me like a performance measure per se. It is relevant data for us to assess in terms of whether we impose new expectations, but it's harder to characterize that in the context of a KPM.
So the devil's in the details, Heath. And we haven't gotten to the details with almost any of these KPMs, nor with the performance measures for the forest management plan, and that is setting targets. So what's the appropriate acreage to support resident wildlife that use complex early successional conditions across the landscape and interconnected to allow those populations to persist? So that's where, if we're setting targets, we can make a guess, or we can work with ODFW, work with universities, work with others to help define what those acreages should be.
I think that's a fair observation. I just had presumed that's how they came to the approval of the HCP. That is to say, they assessed the biological needs of these species and said, this will produce a positive result for them.
Now we're talking apples and oranges. You're talking about the HCAs and the riparian areas. Those are there for the salmonids and for some late successional species. That's the primary, the covered species. Am I right?
Would be the covered species, though there's a lot of.
So there are another 340 species that could occur on those watersheds. And those are not being taken into consideration directly by the HCP. Yet, the mission of state forests, Mike, help me with the wording here, is to provide habitat for all native vertebrates. Is that correct?
Yeah, all native fish and wildlife.
Yes. So what are we doing for the other 340 or 240?
Way to answer that question would be to say, do we see declining population trends? And if you don't, then I think you can conclude that you are doing enough.
You're not going to, ODFW does not monitor the population trends for most of those species. We have some for birds. We have a little bit for some of the mammals. We have almost nothing for the reptiles, amphibians, and some of the fish. So
I agree that that's true. You know, forgive me if I'm uncomfortable setting habitat proxies. It's difficult to know what those surrogates will produce in terms of abundance.
would you like me to dig out the scientific data, the papers that have been published? I mean,
I actually think this is
it's
productive.
all there. In fact, there have been books that thick written about them.
You guys, this sounds like a great dinner conversation.
Yeah, fair enough.
Great conversation. I just want to go on record. I agree with the recommendation as staff put forward. Just want to get that on the record.
All right, thank you. Let's go on to number 11. That's a tough one.
Okay, so yes, KPM number 11, fire suppression effectiveness. This is looking at the percent of wildland fires on ODF protection that are controlled at 10 acres or less. Target is 98%. This is a KPM that we have not met since 2004, so it's been some time, especially given the changing fire environment that we've been dealing with. As of now, we're recommending no changes to it. However, we're going to try to work through trying to make changes to this and update it accordingly. Not in the 27-29 biennium, which we're talking about now, but for the 29-31. We are updating what we're calling our standard, or we have updated our standards of protection policy for the agency. And this is a policy that really helps set metrics for the districts to determine what an adequate level of protection is with their landowner associations. And with that, we should be able to glean some targets to be able to include for how to update this. I'd say, depending on who you are in the agency, I think folks are all over the board on how we should do this. Some think we should just lower the percentage. I'm not necessarily of that mindset per se. I want to try to keep holding a high bar for our fire program. Probably biased, but, I think we are one of the better ones in the nation, and I think we need to try to keep that. And that's the mission given to us in ORS 477 with minimizing acres burned on ODF protection. So we have some work to do to try to figure out what a better metric would be. Some of the things we are throwing around are just looking at annual burned acres that wouldn't exceed 110% of the annual 10-year average.
Reason we're looking at 110% is to provide for that anomaly year, like a 2024, when acres burned spikes up pretty high in one given year. But again, we're not final on that one yet, but more to come on this one, but we're recommending no changes for right now, but it is something we will be working on.
Okay, Liz and Ben.
So Michael, at the end of the fire season, you'll come into your seasonal report. And for the years that I've been here, for most of those years, maybe one not, you were able to hit this percentage. And then, but in the background of that, we just see these increasing severity and size. And so, there will be a year where you don't hit it. And to me, that this would not reflect the work and the effort in a changing environment that you all put in. I mean, it's pretty phenomenal. So I would like to, I encourage you to do what you're doing, is really trying to think of how you best measure that in a, changing environment that is only, the trajectory is getting much more severe. So, because when you do come in with less than, it'll still be something to, celebrate, because you've done some awfully good work.
I think I concur. I think this sounds good. I guess I've got two questions, or a question and a comment. First of all, just keeping that up high, I like that. We're probably not hitting it most years, but it's a good goal to strive for. We should be striving for that. Who came up with the 10 acres? What's magic about 10 acres?
Good question. I don't know if I actually, do you know, Tim? From your time?
Can I weigh in? Can I just weigh in just a
Yeah.
little bit? It's about, there's a recognition that, as fires grow, they get exponentially more expensive, right? And so I think it is very important to have a metric to keep fires small. And I think that's where the 10 acres comes from. And I think 10, whatever that number is, but the reality is once fires escape that kind of size, they tend to get extraordinarily expensive. And what this is a lot about, and I see this quite a bit in Eastern Oregon. I look at fires and I go, that was the fire that could have been bad.
Right.
That was the fire that they caught it. It's the catches. I mean, as a landowner representative, I often pay more attention to the great catches, because they're catching those fires small. That was the whole reason why we have seats. We put, different, resources on a landscape. It's, investing in that. It's a recognition that, boy,
No, and I would concur completely with you, Joe. And I guess I too celebrate those ones that you catch. I guess the reason for my question is, when I see your stats and I see I hear about the reports, sometimes that catch, they caught it at 25 and you're not counting it. And I guess that's more my question about what's magic about 10 acres, because sometimes there's some in the 10 to 100 acre range that's, you didn't spend that much on it. You caught it before it got out of control. That to me feels like it falls in the spirit of this metric. That was the only reason for my question about is 10 acres the right number?
Yeah, no, I mean, Joe's spot on with his assessment. Like I said, I can't explain why they chose specifically 10 acres. I'd have to do some research on that, because this has been on the books for quite a while. But yeah, Joe's is spot on with his assessment.
No, you're right, Ben. I mean, there's good catches. Whatever. I mean, it's really,
it's arbitrary.
As an agency, we are about keeping fires small.
Whether it's the right number or not, there really is something very valuable, I think, for a department to, this is a goal, and this is something everybody understands, keeping under 10 acres, whether you have the right number. But I think there's a lot of value to having a very simple metric that is widely understood and communicated.
Yeah, we can point to last summer, Kelsey Peak. That was stopped at 1,000 acres. That was a great catch in the landscape that was burning in. That could have been easily 10,000, 50,000 acres. So, but yeah, that'll be our goal to try to find that, what is an achievable metric there that can tell the story better.
The last comment I would say just quickly on this is just going back to that previous one about smoke. I think this goes hand in hand very well with a prescribed fire metric. I think we really need both, because during fire season, it's all about number 11, but the rest of the year, it's all about that other one. And I think just from a messaging perspective, having both to point to, I think would be really, really valuable.
Okay, we'll go to the next one.
Okay, going on to KPM number 12. So prevention of human caused fires. This one's a little confusing on just how it's set up. It's really looking at, let me get my notes here, sorry. The number of human caused wildfires per 100,000 Oregon residents, which isn't always the most easy to articulate at times. So the goal really is to help. We do plan on trying to make a change to this one if we can, and to make a KPM that's easier to measure and understand, not only for us internally, but the public as well. And trying to stick with that same theme as what I mentioned with KPM number 11. One of the ideas we're throwing around is human caused wildfires in Oregon would not exceed 110% of the 10-year average. Again, why 110% is just to try to plan for that anomaly of a year if there is that certain spike in human caused fires. This way it's just easier to understand and we can better articulate it in our messaging.
This one doesn't make sense to me. The change doesn't make sense. I mean, I understand it's not the sentiment of saying that, you know, that the number of human caused should not fluctuation based on population. That's a nice sentiment, but this will really age me. But when I was a little boy in Oregon, there were a million people in Oregon total, half in Portland, half the rest of the state. And now there's, what is it, 4.2? Not only, you know, has that happened, a whole lot more of them spend a whole lot more time on the outdoors. And so there's that many more trailers going down the street with chains dragging and all of that. It seems like totally appropriate to me that we measure it against population. Anyhow, that's my. Any other opinions on this one?
I agree with you, Jim, but I'm struggling to come up with another metric that would reflect not only the growing population, but also the proportion of that population that is responsible for these fires. And maybe it is just simply that percentage or that proportion.
Need to get into the fine grained detail on where people are spending all their time, but I mean, I just think disconnecting it from population growth you know, may look like the department is underperforming when they actually are well.
Does the increase in human caused fires increase at the same rate as the increase in the population of Oregon? I mean, you've got two trends, right? One going higher or lower than the other.
Anyhow.
I just, out of curiosity, what does ODF do to stop human caused fires? Is this like education campaigns? Like, is this really in your control?
Yeah, I'd say it's a mix of prevention messaging and then the enforcement side. So we, every year in the spring, we go on pretty heavy messaging campaigns. We try to stick to our top 3, sometimes top 5 causes for wildland fire in terms of human caused fires. And then it's also the enforcement side, where we're out and about with our fire wardens.
Reveal my own ignorance there. This, in that light, then it may be enough to say a downward trend. You know, that this may be one of those metrics that fit. You could even have it be a downward trend in the human caused fires relative in proportion to the population, if you want to.
Yeah. Okay.
No other strong feelings on this one? Okay, I think we can move on.
All right, KPM 13, again, Josh Bernard, Forest Resources Division Chief for the record. So KPM 13 focuses on damage to Oregon's forest from insects, disease, and other agents. And at this time, we're recommending no action with that. We would maintain that and continue reporting that KPM.
They're getting late in the afternoon, or it's not very controversial. I can't figure out which one.
Cool. All right. I want to add one. Can I do that? Okay, so Josh is doing all this pausing. I figure somebody's got to fill the space. So just kidding. Anyway, so when you look at these at a packet, oh, is there a question? Oh, when you look at these as a package, so we had kind of like an economic and environmental, and we wanted to add a social one that we haven't before, and we've always kind of struggled with this. But I think it helps us with a funding aspect potentially in the future. So for our recreation, education, interpretation program, we'd want to add a KPM that's basically a three-part KPM. So on recreation facilities, and we're not really looking at trails, we're looking at those critical infrastructures associated with our trails and associated with our facilities. Having a target of 95% that are open for the recreation season for the year. So these campgrounds and trailheads and so forth, that type of thing. And there's a little bit of a caveat here, you know, we do of course have to control for wind throw and unexpected disturbance events, and even some of our own operational conflicts, you know, where we have a timber sale next to a trail. And then the second part would be critical trail assets that are in good or better condition. The target would be 90%, and it would really focus on things like bridges, culverts, and fords. So things that are really affecting water, which is our main thing with trails, is how they interact with water. It's not the entire tread surface of a trail or anything like that, because some of those are very much disconnected from that type of thing. And then the third, for education and interpretation, would focus on interactions with school classes or individual school children. And so we're still working on a target for what that would be. And of course, we'd have to deal with things like COVID, right? If that came back around, and how we're delivering that stuff. But basically, that component would really reinforce the education and interpretation portion of the mission associated with REI. So, and this is a good one to be able to anchor into the funding piece. Right now, currently, all of this stuff is paid for by a combination of OHV funds from OPRD, and that's specific to the OHV recreation, and then timber dollars. So when we come up against, hey, why aren't you guys providing recreation? It's like, because we can't afford it. It calls out the need for funding and supporting of some of these things that have a consistent demand, regardless of what the timber market or the timber volume or what have you is doing on that management side of it. Anyway, that's the one we can consider adding.
Okay, Mike, I'm going to ask you the question. How'd you come up with the targets? Is that existing what you believe them to be at current conditions?
It's what we think is reasonable based on what we're able to maintain with our current staff. Yeah, and it came straight from our recreation program manager. Yep. The piece on the E&I still needs to be worked out a little bit, because the classroom piece and those types of interactions vary a little bit. And while I'm at it, I'll just point out that is a K through 12 nexus there as well. You know, we bring in classes into the Tillamook Forest Center as part of the K through 12 curriculum, then or opportunities for those school children. And so there's a nexus there to the broader education.
You know, for the record, I like recreating on state forests too. I would add a KPM if I were the king of the world for the number of shooting lanes open as well. But we don't need to add that here. For me, the tricky one with this is going to be like, to the degree you're failing to meet that target, you know, what does that mean? And I think you're right. There's a couple ways to respond to that. One could be, hey, legislature, we need more money to reach that target. I would hope that the conversation could also be, hey, we have the opportunity to manage these lands a little more intensively in compliance with all of our obligations in the HCP, and that produces the money to realize these outcomes. And so, you know, one doesn't drive the other. I guess historically, my sense is that the industry has been a little apprehensive about kind of explicitly endorsing recreation objectives on state lands, if only because it kind of it deviates from, you know, some other priorities that state forests have. But personally, I honestly think these are good KPMs, and I would love to see recreational opportunities this good on state forests. You know, I'm supportive of that, and you know, I think you can expect to hear me say over time that we could realize these if produced a little more money through management.
Any other comments on this one? Like it's not too controversial. Okay. And I
Yeah,
think-
sorry about that, Ben.
Yeah,
So,
after that, we have a little time left, and we can also have further conversation about other KPMs tomorrow morning too. But
since we have these folks here, yeah, so I was surprised that there is not a KPM related to demographic diversity of the workforce. And I don't think there has been in the past, but it's certainly been a topic of this board over the last many years. There was a lot of effort put forth to try to characterize that. And it seems like it's something that should be fairly straightforward to document going forward.
other agencies have anything like that we can model from?
Not to my knowledge, but I think it's probably a enterprise question, some of the hiring practices and recruitments and those kind of things. So I'll check in on that topic. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I think especially for this agency and those agencies which have very unbalanced gender and racial and ethnicity representation.
In other words, natural resource agencies.
yeah, you know, for me on that one, this is kind of that perennial question of, you know, what would that evidence if we do not? There's two potential answers to that. One could be things that the agency is in control of, and the alternative could be things that the agency is not in control. And for me to attribute a failure of the agency to things they are not in control of, I think is kind of misplacing, you know, our attention and priorities. I can envision a circumstance where the agency's not even trying to recruit from a diverse population. And in that circumstance, I would agree that the agency is failing a goal that we have for them. But to the degree they are trying and are making steps to recruit a diverse workforce, and that is not producing the desired results, that could be because there are social and structural issues that run all the way to kindergartners and frankly, cultural priorities among different populations that are outside of the control of the agency. And I would hesitate to pin ODF with some kind of failure for producing that. And I wonder if it may be enough for you or for other members that the agency KPM may focus more on things in their control. And I don't know how you would measure that. I can envision, you know, prioritizing recruitment in particular ways. But just mean to throw that out there. I really bristle at the idea that a workforce composition being non-diverse is definitionally evidence of that employer's discrimination.
Liz?
I think there are some ways that if you choose to include that, you can measure that, and it's maybe not just the endpoint, but what the agency is doing to build, not only just to recruit, but to build leadership actings, training, all sorts of stuff, shadowing, assignments that show that you are invested in those leadership positions and will diversify throughout. So I think there's a number of things that you can do and put in place besides an endpoint number. Lots of agencies have done that.
So I think the other piece to keep in mind, that KPMs are going to inform our budget process. So when I say it's probably, so we have, Chief Human Resources Office and our cultural competencies and those kind of pieces is where that will come out when I say the enterprise level. And so, like you said, Brenda, last year we did a big lift to report out on where we are, and we intend to do that again. So I think I'd like to circle back with the board. This would be one to come back to about how and where do we track and report on these things towards the enterprise. Thanks.
Whispered in my ear that Ben may have a KPM idea, and we've got the right crowd here. Here are new ideas. Let's go for it.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to all of you and Kate for setting this up. This was very, very informative. I felt like this has been so far a really good exercise for all of us, and one that I've been wanting to do for many years since I've been on the board. So thank you. This feels really good. I have, as I've been sort of thinking on this for quite a while now, and I'm also the liaison member to the CFF, and we had a discussion at CFF when I was there at their last meeting about KPMs, and as I've talked to other stakeholders about how to think about these KPMs, one that kind of kept coming to the surface was, in some ways, maybe a expansion of number 13, but a sort of state of the forest. What is the condition of our, is it 16 million acres of forest lands that we oversee in one form or another? We are losing forest to wildfire. We are losing forest to insects and disease. We are losing forest to development and land conversion. So that's just plain losing acres of forest that are growing trees. We are losing resilience and productivity on many, many more acres. And number 13 starts to sort of get at the edges of that, but I think there is an opportunity to look much more holistically. And I'm thinking of really a sort of a state of the forest report. That can, of course, get really messy really quickly of what is the definition of quality and how we go about this. But we talk about these millions of acres, and we think about them capital F forests, and we ascribe ecosystem benefits to these acres. Yet the reality is it's much more nuanced than that. And there's a lot of acres that are not in good shape. There's a lot of acres that we are losing to climate change, to fire, that will never grow trees again. Or maybe we'll grow a very different type of forest and provide a very different set of ecosystem services. And I think if we want to measure the effectiveness of this department and our work, I couldn't think of a KPM that's more foundational to this work that we do. How many acres of forest do we have that are in good shape, that are threatened? And I think it goes back to the EO that we talked about earlier today. There's some benchmarking that needs to happen around that, and I think this would be really valuable. And I imagine that with a combination of the surveys in number 13 and some remote sensing work, a lot of the pieces are already there. It's a matter of collecting that in a report. But I think if we're interested in asking the legislature for money to fund any of our activities, it seems like that baseline report would be really important. And I don't have the exact mechanism of how to do it, and I wanted to bring it up when you all were here, but it seems like some version of that would be really, really important to think about adding to this list.
I'd have a few comments about that. One is that I think it would be important that components be measured within that, like land conversion. The other thing that I think we need to face head on is that, we like to measure things that we think we can make progress on or are likely to make progress on. We don't particularly like to measure things where the odds are stacked against us. And I think, what you're talking about, in my view, with climate change and all, in a lot of ways, the odds are stacked against us. Does that allow us not to measure and know what's going on? Because the better we measure, the better, we can get support from the public, legislature, and everything, and where it can make a difference. Because before it's sort of too late, not too dramatic, but I just think I totally agree we need to do that kind of thing. But I think we just have to have eyes wide open that that this is an area where a whole lot of it is not. Some of it is within the control of the department, and a lot of it's not. We need to measure it regardless.
I would, in response to that, say if we don't know, we aren't going to be able to apply our resources effectively. And climate change is a bit of a losing battle, but there are real opportunities to focus those efforts. And yeah.
I have a different one, but I generally agree with you. I feel like it'd be, I could envision a red, green, yellow on is the forest good condition or attributes of the forest in good condition. But I think that would require some development, some thoughtful work to get there. But I have to insist that, I bring it back. I really, we got comments from AOL on the FMP, and we'll come to that. But in the context of these KPMs, they're relevant. I thought it was a brilliant idea that in the context of the agency's finances, the legislature should be interested and we should be interested in the state of the Forest Development Fund relative to the agency's budgetary requirements. I think that having a KPM there for maintenance at FDF would make just a ton of sense. Frankly, in some ways, I'm surprised we don't already have it. That's the one place you could have an expectation about, maintenance of adequate reserve funds in the FDF relative to operations. And it would give the agency a prompt to raise the flag and say, hey, we've got a problem here relative to the KPM. And it would be a useful political tool, I think, to go to the legislature and say, hey, FDF's not looking great. We need more money or something. So I really think it would be a good KPM. I don't know if you have thoughts on it.
I'm not opposed to monitoring the FDF, obviously, and we put out pretty regular reports for that. I think one of the things I would, note is that the legislature kind of does have eyes on that if they choose to, through our biennial budgeting process, and the choices that we make within that. And one of the things that we are doing is actually trying to tighten our biennial budget up a little bit to our fiscal budgets. Because we can honestly never afford to expend our biennial budget. But, there's a process there working through LFO and CFO as we go into each cycle, because we cannot present them with a budget that doesn't balance, right? You can't give the legislature a negative budget. So there's the opportunity there for the discussion with them. Like I say, obviously we monitor the FDF pretty closely. I am not opposed to that. I would say that, there's probably more skin in the game for the legislature if they are giving us some funding in some way to anchor into the health of that. Otherwise, it's always been kind of like, well, that's a you problem, right? And so that's kind kind of the frustrating part, but I don't disagree in principle.
Yeah, and you raise a good point about biennial, like these KPMs are kind of looked at every couple of years, and that's not frequent enough relative to this issue. It may be that that performance measure, and this is actually AOL's recommendation, that that be one of the performance measures that we implement as a board relative to the forest management plan, and that this isn't as suited to kind of the legislative KPM process. But you'll hear me raise this again. I think it's just a really great idea.
Just, I mean, yeah, I'm anchoring into the biennial budget there. KPMs are reported annually. So it would be more frequent tracking.
Feels 8 minutes before 4 o'clock are scheduled.
Yeah. I'll fix that for you. No, I'm kidding.
You are very dependent.
I'm kidding. I was just thinking, like, to the degree that we want to grapple with this more in the morning, would it be helpful to bring like suggested KPM language or something that we could grapple with? Like, I don't know if Ben, like, or is it the kind of thing where where it would be better to give that to like the work group that you anticipate? Like, I kind of don't know how this is going to go. And it may be a little weird, like if I just like type something up and bring it to the group in the morning.
Any reason not to.
Okay. Oh, geez. I was thinking about like one paragraph and I'm hoping somebody helps me with it. But yeah, I was just trying to think, like, if we're going to make real progress, how do we do that most productively?
Yeah, I think that that would be helpful as a starting point. And I think the other piece to keep in mind, I've really appreciated this conversation. I appreciate all of you guys walking us through it. This has been on the to-do list for a long time and the feedback's been great. And I guess I'd just say too, is like, we might move forward with 2 or 3 short-term changes or ones we know would need to be changed or really low-hanging fruit. And then as this conversation's gone on, there's a lot of alignment around, are we going to get the HCPs, the executive orders, all those kind of pieces. And so I want to move us ahead in a thoughtful manner, allowing for some of those inputs. But I think having, I don't even remember the last time these were all updated, quite honestly. And so having this conversation and having this work, shelf stock, so to speak, and ready to go, I think is going to be really critical for us moving forward to show the effectiveness this agency is having for Oregonians, quite honestly.
Yeah, I will do comments there. One surefire way to prevent me from bringing something in writing in the morning is to buy me drinks tonight. So that'll solve that problem. But I would also say there's a decent argument that some of this work is appropriately informed by our new state forester. And so, while we may take kind of a shot at this in the near term, it seems likely to me that Miss Casey, may have some value to add there, and we should probably revisit again once she's had an opportunity to onboard.
Duly noted. Yeah, congratulations, everybody. Very great conversation. I think this has been good for all of us. And well done, everybody. And with that, I think we are ready to end the day and reconvene at 8 o'clock in the morning. And how you're going to do that tomorrow?
Just want to know where the board, they all know where you're going at 6:15 this evening. You all know where you're going to
I didn't quite hear you.
Right. Good night. At 6:15, you know where you're going.
It was in that email
Yes.
from
Just wanted you to know.
Ariel. I was
Bentley.
going to look back at the email and remind myself.
You won't be able to.
What time are we supposed to?